Hello, everybody, and welcome to Charts with Dan as we wrap up the Christmas season, heading into New Year's, and thank God, 2021. But there is still some business to wrap up, and it concerns Wonder Woman 1984. Last week, we were talking about the fact that we were curious about what it was going to do at the box office. Warner Brothers was looking for anything over $10 million. Well, it got what it wished for, and it seems like it got a lot of streaming viewers as well. We're going to delve into that number. And there's another number concerning Wonder Woman 1984 that really piqued my interest, and I'm not going to lie, an obscenely deep dive into some numbers to figure that out. But first, let's see what Wonder Woman did at the box office. We mentioned that Warner Brothers was considering anything over $10 million a win for Wonder Woman 1984, and it easily cleared that landmark, drawing in $16.7 million over the three-day holiday weekend. That is the best three-day opening for any film since the pandemic, including Tenet. Remember, the opening weekend quote-unquote numbers on Tenet included about 10 days of release, including the Canadian release of the previous weekend. So these are the highest pure three-day numbers for any film since the pandemic broke out here in the United States back in March. That is good news for theater owners because it shows that there are still some people that are willing to go to the theaters. Keep in mind that well over half of theaters are currently closed here in North America, and there are many people that just don't quite feel safe yet going. So the fact that you can bring out this number of folks out to a movie on opening weekend on Christmas is a good sign for theaters. Let's hope that there is not an issue with outbreaks, etc., related to the theater-going experience. I know that movie theaters have put a lot of time and money and effort into making the theater-going experience safe, and I certainly hope that everybody who was able to go to a movie theater this past weekend was able to have a safe and pleasurable experience. Wonder Woman 1984 also apparently did very well on streaming. We talked about the fact that usually you don't know how a film does on a streaming platform unless the company itself comes out and says so. Well, Warner Media shared some very good news on their end about Wonder Woman 1984, saying that half of their retail subscribers to HBO Max accessed and watched Wonder Woman 1984 on its opening day, Christmas Day. And we've talked about the fact that HBO Max is weird when we're talking about subscribers. When they say retail subscribers, that means the people that actually go out and specifically subscribe to HBO Max. They have a huge user base as well that is legacy cable customers, people that have their service through AT&T, etc. That's not included in these numbers. Basically, what Warner Media is saying is that of the people who went out and said, I want to subscribe to HBO Max specifically, half of them watched Wonder Woman 1984 on the first day. That's obviously a good sign for the streaming service because it brings a lot of people. It also is probably a good sign for the number of people, at least for this film and perhaps for future films, that would be willing to watch them at home. If you're bringing in half of your subscribers on day one, we'll see if that kind of interest stays the same. Unfortunately, we're not going to know because, like I said, if the interest is low, I don't think Warner Media is going to put out a press release saying, oh, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in this movie. So we will see how that goes, but it looks like a success as far as the box office goes, a success as far as HBO Max goes, at least in Warner Media's eyes. So we will see what happens next. Now, it was announced that they will be fast-tracking at Warner Brothers a third film, as they said, a concluding film in the trilogy with Gal Gadot and Patty Jenkins returning in the next Wonder Woman film. So it looks like we will be getting a third movie. But there is another number that didn't have anything to do with finances or streaming services that I really wanted to look at, and that is the critical reviews of the film. When Wonder Woman 1984 first started getting reviews, the word was glowing. It was a very, very warm reception. But as time went on, that reception got a little dimmer and a little cooler. And before I even start, I want to make it very clear that this is not an indictment of anything or any platform or anyone. This really was something that I was legitimately curious about because something happened with Wonder Woman 1984 that you don't often see happening. When you look on Rotten Tomatoes, which is where people go for most of their criticism nowadays, they have different levels. They have fresh, they have rotten, they have something also called certified fresh. And the day after the embargo dropped on Wonder Woman 1984, it was certified fresh by Rotten Tomatoes on the morning of December 16th. And the important thing to remember about being certified fresh is that it's not just that you're getting really good reviews. It is generally a marker that Rotten Tomatoes thinks will stick. As a matter of fact, when you look on their website about the label certified fresh, it gives you all the different requirements: a TomatoMeter score of 75% or higher, consistently a number of reviews from top critics, a minimum number of reviews. But there's also a little thing in this paragraph that says that the TomatoMeter score must be consistent and unlikely to deviate significantly before a film or TV show is marked certified fresh. And that's what got my curiosity going. It's not necessarily that the numbers on Wonder Woman dropped over time. That happens a lot. A movie will come out, a smaller number of critics will see it. When it widens out to a larger group, the numbers will come down a bit. But this was a substantial drop, and the fact that Rotten Tomatoes gave it that certified fresh marker and pulled it away also is something that you don't see very often. And it got me thinking about how and why this happened. So I did what I do, which was I spent about 14 to 16 hours. This is crazy. This was insane. I do not recommend this. Going through each and every one of the reviews for Wonder Woman 1984, not just the reviews, but what those people have reviewed before, when they came out, etc. And I've come up with at least some reasons why Wonder Woman 1984 started out so high and ended up a little bit lower, actually a lot lower. And there are some things that may be things that you would think, oh, well, that makes sense. There are some things that really surprised me. So before we get into what did happen, I want to eliminate a few things that didn't happen, because these results that you're about to see are the ones that showed significant deviations by certain criteria. But there were some things where I didn't see any change. So for example, not knowing where this data was going to lead me, I theorized that perhaps the people who put out reviews later in the cycle maybe were a little bit more critical than the people that had reviewed movies earlier in the cycle. That wasn't true. I looked at the last 10 reviews from every critic that put in a review for Wonder Woman 1984 up to this point. Any ones that come after, unfortunately, won't be included in this data. But they all were pretty consistent. They were all pretty much as critical of films as the others. So there was no more or less critical group that put out reviews. I also thought, well, was there a group that was perhaps harsher on DC films in particular than another group? I tracked reviews from the last 4 DC live-action films. That would be Shazam, Aquaman, Joker, and Birds of Prey, and the reviews all pretty much lined up. No matter who wrote it or when they wrote it, it was pretty much in line. This group of people that reviewed Wonder Woman were no more or less critical of DC films on average than the critics who reviewed those films. It could be that a lot of these were the same critics, but there was no target on the DC back here. This was not a case of people being harsher on a comic book film, and so it came down to these criteria. Now, the important thing to remember first, and maybe one of the reasons why we saw this precipitous drop-off, is that the embargo times for Wonder Woman 1984 didn't work the same way that a lot of other movies do. Usually, there's one embargo time. A lot of critics see it beforehand, and when that embargo drops, then you get a flood of reviews that constitute a fairly large chunk of what the final pool of reviews is going to be. Wonder Woman 1984 worked a little bit differently. Warner Media and Warner Brothers did not authorize most critics to see the film ahead of the embargo date dropping. And if you don't know what the embargo date is, that means when you're allowed to release your review of the movie. The embargo for Wonder Woman 1984 dropped on December 15th. But when you look at the number of reviews that came in by date, only 76 of the film's reviews came out on embargo date, and that was because fewer critics were authorized to watch it beforehand. I can speak to that from personal experience. I was not able to see Wonder Woman 1984 before the embargo, and as you can see, a lot of other critics weren't as well. So only 76 reviews came out on the embargo date. From December 16th to the 24th, that would be after the embargo but before the release of the film, that's when you saw the biggest number of reviews come out. 139 reviews came out in the week between embargo day and release day. And then you see December 25th to present. Those are the people that more than likely watched it when it was released on HBO Max or in theaters. So that's the first variable that makes Wonder Woman 1984 a little bit unique. There was not a majority of reviews out at the embargo time. They trickled out a little bit more over time. So this is embargo day. These are the critics that saw Wonder Woman 1984 and had their reviews ready when Warner Media and Warner Brothers said, you can release your reviews. As I mentioned before, not the bulk of reviews, but they were by far the most positive reviews. 67 fresh reviews and 9 rotten reviews. That's a fresh rating of 88%. And as I mentioned, it was certified fresh early that next day. So these early reviews were the main driver behind Wonder Woman 1984 getting certified fresh as early as it was. They were overwhelmingly positive. However, things began to turn in the days afterwards. December 16th to 24th, as I mentioned, this is where you saw the biggest chunk of reviews come in. These were critics who were allowed to see the movie early by and large and either chose not to or didn't see it in time to do their review at the embargo time. So they would have seen it on December 16th, 17th, 18th, etc. This was a different story. Still positive, but much, much lower. Fresh reviews, 88. Rotten reviews, 51, for a fresh rating of 63%, just hovering above that fresh line. And so this is the first big reason why Wonder Woman lost that certified fresh rating. Its earliest reviews were extremely positive, and then it saw a big drop off, 25 percentage points from the first batch of reviews to the second batch of reviews the week after the embargo dropped. Then we had reviews that came out on Christmas Day, which is when the movie was released, and then up until today, as of the time I was prepping this data. And this was the worst batch of all. These are generally people that watched it at home on HBO Max, etc. It is well below the fresh line. Fresh reviews, 42. Rotten reviews, 48, for a 46%. So as you see Wonder Woman's TomatoMeter score, and it has been dropping, it's stabilized right around 65%. But these are the ones that really have been dragging it down, because the majority of critics who saw the film on or after release day have not given it a good review. So that's the first key piece of information to know. Very ecstatic early reviews, and then lessening enthusiasm as time goes on. There's another thing that I wanted to break down, and you may be wondering why I'm bringing up this data, and it's not for the reason that you think, but these were the gender demographics as far as the critics for this film. 30% female critics, 70% male critics. Now, Rotten Tomatoes has been doing a lot of work, and the critical community in general has been doing a lot of work to help equalize that number a little bit. And some motion has been made, but I think more needs to be made. But it was a 70-30 split male-female. Overall, females critics rated the film 71%, male critics rated the film 62%. So, about a 9% gap, but that's not massive. It's not a massive disparity. It's not like a 70-40 disparity. They're both right around the same way, kind of in the mediocre phase. So, again, why did Wonder Woman come out of the gate so strongly? Well, let's look at the breakdown as far as male reviewers and female reviewers when you look at the reviews by release date. As you can see on embargo date, female critics made up almost 37% of the review pool. Now, that is the largest share of any of the other time periods when reviews were dropped, but that does not tell the whole story. Yes, the female critics for Wonder Woman on embargo date were very positive on the film at 82%. However, when you look at the male critics, who made up about 2/3 of that pool still, they were higher on the film than even their female counterparts. Male critics rated the film at 92% on embargo date. And look at the drop-off. When you look at the next pool of reviews from December 16th through 24th, so after embargo date, female critical reviews stayed fairly consistent. They only dropped off about 6%. However, reviews from male critics absolutely fell off a cliff, over 30 percentage points different. Male critics who reviewed the film and released their review on embargo day rated at 92%. Male critics who reviewed the film after the embargo date and before the release date, a rotten 59%. That is a massive disparity. And as you can see, it's the biggest drop-off of any group between days of anyone else on the chart. Then you see female critics from the week before release to after release. There is actually a pretty substantial drop-off there from 76% to 52%. Their share, there were 27% of the reviews between embargo day and release, 27% of reviews just about between release day and present. Male reviews continued to drop from 59% to 45%. So that is a big reason why we saw the numbers for Wonder Woman that we did. Huge enthusiasm from male critics who constituted the majority of the pool on embargo day, and an equally low opinion from male critics of the film on the week after embargo day. Another group that was sort of driving the train a little bit on this was top critics. Those are the critics that Rotten Tomatoes designates as critics of note. It's a designation that the platform itself makes. Obviously, these are critics that will have greater access to a lot of films. Many of them had access to the film before the first embargo date. In that initial group of reviews, top critics made up about 38% of the critics reviewing the film. That was by far the largest share of any of the other groups, and those critics rated it at 90%. That first group rated it at 90%, but the ratings fell off with top critics as time went on. The top critics in the next batch after embargo but before release rated the movie at 63%. Currently, critics from release date on, top critics are reviewing the movie at 29%. So top critic rankings have not stayed high as it's gone on, but the 90% from those top critics, because they constituted a bigger share of critics in that first group after embargo day, did also drive this train a little bit with getting the Wonder Woman 1984 score higher. So as we're looking at all this data and sort of trying to draw conclusions, you can't judge intent, and data doesn't show intent. The one thing that I can say, just looking at the results, is it is statistically proven here that the first group of critics who released films on Wonder Woman were far more enthusiastic about the film than the critics who came after. And with each successive jump down, people got less and less enthusiastic. And there's another thing that I want to make very clear, which is that I am not in any way throwing any critics' credibility into question or diminishing their validity. Critics do not choose when theaters allow them to see films. Studios choose when that happens. So studios chose the critics that they decided to choose, and they did their jobs. The really interesting thing is to see how these numbers dropped from group to group, the fact that you do see a marked decline each time. And you'd have to go and talk to each one of those critics as to why that is. But this is one of those things that, as a numbers guy, was very fascinating to me, and I spent way too much time going into a lot of this. I'm sure great other number crunchers could go in and draw more conclusions than I could. But when we're talking about Wonder Woman 1984, I think this is a very interesting confluence of events, of a staggered embargo, different groups of critics that reacted very differently to the film, and a result that I think is the only sort of smear on the release of this film. The box office looked good. The streaming numbers looked good. The one thing that I think Warner Brothers perhaps would like to have back is the conversation around the critical reaction, and then, of course, watching those critical numbers plummet as the weekend goes on. So I will keep an eye on these numbers. As I mentioned before, as of right now, it is sticking at around 65%. It looks like it might hang on to that fresh rating. We'll see how many other reviews come in. But as more reviews come in, it gets harder and harder to change that TomatoMeter because you're having to do more and more to sort of steer the ship the other way. But this is a very interesting case for me to study. And as always, I will be on the lookout for even more cases to look into because I'm a dork and I like these things. So let's move on from that and look at what our 2020 charts are looking like. Now, this was the last box office weekend of the year. Next week, we start box office year 2021. It's not going to be a great start, I'll tell you that much. Hopefully, by the end of 2021, we're going to have a lot better charts than this. But let's see what the year looks like thus far. No change domestically from where we were last week. We still have The Croods, A New Age there at number 10. It would appear from Wonder Woman's debut that it will be on the domestic chart. So we'll see if that bumps off The Croods, or if The Croods can do enough business to overtake The Gentleman, and perhaps that's the film that gets knocked off. But we're looking at what is likely to be pretty close to our final 2020 box office chart. Who would have thought two films that crossed the $100 million mark, both released in the first couple months of the year? Certainly not the year that anyone had imagined. Let's look at the 2020 worldwide box office. We have The 800, My People, My Homeland, Bad Boys for Life, Tenet, and Demon Slayer all staying where they were. Same with Sonic the Hedgehog, Dolittle, Zhengjia, Birds of Prey, and Sacrifice. We will see if Wonder Woman can swing onto that chart as well. We talked last week about the fact that it did not have a great opening in some markets, particularly China. As a matter of fact, it fell off a cliff in China. I think over 90% drop between week 1 and week 2. So we're not going to be looking at a whole lot more from China, although Soul reportedly did well in China. Soul premiered on Disney Plus in the markets that had Disney Plus this past weekend, and it did not have a great first day in China, but apparently the word of mouth spread, and it did well over the weekend as it went. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on Soul in China because it has the potential to make a bit of a late run, which is rare at the Chinese box office, but you see it happening from time to time. But it's going to be playing at streaming only in most markets, which is the markets where Disney Plus is available. There was another big milestone reached this past weekend. We've been talking about it for quite some time. In Japan, there is now a new highest grossing film of all time. Demon Slayer has topped Spirited Away to become the highest grossing film in Japanese box office history. It has topped Titanic, Frozen, Your Name, Harry Potter, you name it. It's at the top of the heap. And this has been a long journey for Demon Slayer. A lot of people weren't sure if it was going to topple that Studio Ghibli giant at Spirited Away, but it is now the new number one. One of the weird paradoxes of this pandemic is the fact that with all of these lockdowns and with so much of the world's global box office hurting, we now have an all-time top grosser in Japan. Let's go back in time to look at a past weekend in box office history here in North America, and we're going to go to the last weekend of the year 2013. I know it doesn't seem like that long ago. Actually, it does at this point, doesn't it? And I just picked this because I liked it. You have The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug in week 3 was the number one film, but Frozen, to be a box office analyst when Frozen came out. Frozen, in its 6th week, almost took the number one spot. In week 6, that movie came on really strong, came out at Thanksgiving, and then had a great run at Christmas to become the juggernaut that it is now. Anchorman 2: The Legend continues in its 2nd week at $19.6 million. I went to see that movie with my mother and my grandmother. My grandma thought it was hilarious. American Hustle in week 3, very competitive there for that number 3 spot. And The Wolf of Wall Street in 5th place, very competitive as well. Now keep in mind, The Wolf of Wall Street had opened on a Christmas Day, so that was not the full weekend run of Wolf of Wall Street. It had a couple of days to accumulate money, and it actually did very well, one of Scorsese's biggest box office hits. Let's look at some other notable moments from the final week in box office history. In 1962, To Kill a Mockingbird, a true American classic, hit theaters. In 1973, The Sting opened on its way to Best Picture. In 1990, Francis Ford Coppola closed out the Godfather trilogy with The Godfather Part 3. It did not achieve the heights of its previous films. There's a new cut out that I was interested in, but I hear not a whole lot's changed, so I'm kind of on the fence about that. And then back in 2002, I just love this movie. Catch Me If You Can from Steven Spielberg, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, opened very well. It just happened to be behind the 2nd or 3rd week of The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So another box office hit, a great team up. If you haven't seen Catch Me If You Can, you really should. I love that movie. I think it's really good. And before we close out, let's look at what people are watching at home on the streaming charts. Over on Amazon, no change actually. Some shifts in position, but the same 10 movies that were there last week. The Croods, A New Age, Greenland, Songbird, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Let Him Go, The Grinch, Love and Monsters, 1999's A Christmas Carol, Freaky, and Prancer are the top 10 films over on Amazon. Let's see what people are watching on iTunes. The Croods, A New Age, Tenet, Greenland, and The War with Grandpa stay in the top 5. But then we have The Informer entering there at number 5. The Harry Potter Complete Collection, I think some people are spending some of that Christmas money, is there at number 6. Love and Monsters returns to the chart at number 7. Then we have Elf, which is a holdover. Honest Thief comes back to the chart, starring Liam Neeson at number 9. And National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation is there at number 10. And finally, let's see what people are watching on Netflix. And at number 1 is an awards season hopeful, although reviews haven't been stellar for it. The Midnight Sky, starring George Clooney, also a big creative force behind the film. And number 2 is We Can Be Heroes. Pedro Pascal is having what they call a moment, because he's in this movie, he's in Wonder Woman 1984, and of course The Mandalorian, all at the same time. After We Collided at number 3, did a lot of money globally, did not get a big box office release here in North America, but I think a lot of teenagers very happy that they can now watch that film over on Netflix. Then at number 4, Death to 2020, which is a wrap-up of this hellish year from the only appropriate creators, the minds behind Black Mirror. That sounds about right. At number 4, How the Grinch Stole Christmas at 5, Christmas Chronicles 2 at 6, The Croods. I think a lot of people perhaps going to see Croods 2 or perhaps getting ready to watch it by watching the first film. That's at number 7. Ava at number 8, A California Christmas at number 9. And I still don't think people know what peppermint means or what it is, because it's still there at number 10. Not a Christmas film, but it seems like a lot of people are still finding that out. And that does it for the last charts of 2020. Of course, next week I'll still be here, but we will be in 2021, and we will have bid farewell to the nightmarish hellscape that was this year. And I think we all know that it's not going to be like turning a page. There's still going to be some things that linger, but even the symbolic fresh start, I think, is welcome to a lot of folks. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you. This has been a big year of change for me, obviously, change in my job, change in where I live. It's been an exciting year. It's been difficult at times. It's been stressful at times. And, sometimes there have been occasions where I've vented a little bit. Sometimes you wake up and you see some folks talking about your Mandalorian review and you go like, oh, man. But even in those occasions where I vented, I really do want to say thank you to so many of you who are watching or who follow me on Twitter or who are my friends in real life or who are wonderful people who live here with me, who have just been so amazing and so supportive and have really shown me that there are far more people that are willing to help you up in this world than are willing to kick you while you're down. And so my New Year's resolution, and some people have asked me, my New Year's resolution is to remember that. It's something that I've strived for a long time. I'm not perfect, but I'm going to try to get better. And I want to thank all of you for joining me here, for getting on board this adventure. This has been an amazing adventure and making this a really fun ride so far. Here's to 2021 and all the years beyond. And I want to say a special thank you to everyone who's joined me over on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. Particularly these patrons. These are just some of my producer level patrons. We are wrapping up the year. We've still got Movie Club ahead of us, but we are going to start everything all over again in 2021, and we're having a lot of fun. I'm continuing to try to make things bigger and better and improve them, and we'd love to have you come and join us at any level. It really is a good time. Also, please don't forget to check out my podcast, All My Movies, which comes out each and every week, except for this week. We are taking the week off because we had an extra week in December, but we will be back in the first week of January. All My Movies, again, is something that I love doing, and I'm still continuing to look and find ways to make it bigger and better. So thank you, everyone. It's been one hell of a 2020. Enjoy a couple of days off, turn the page, and I'll see you here next week. Thanks for watching.